Hey, hey,
Oh my gosh, I feel like it's been forever.
10 years.
10 years. I feel old. I feel old.
And what do you think I feel?
Nah, come on. You're not that old yet. You're not that old yet.
Some days I feel like that way.
But
How you
how is
been?
been? I've been good. I've been good. I mean, got into coaching, been trying to, build my brand and get everything, in a straight line. Been overseas coaching, coached the semi pro. So I feel like I've seen a couple of places, looking for the next, so now I'm a dean of students at, the high school. So I feel like, I'm climbing up to the top. Well, how you
Yes,
been?
I'm good. I'm good. I've been following your journey. I've seen you moving and shaking and doing great things and coaching, like you said, everybody, right? And it's so awesome. And I think that's so rewarding for any coach, right? To see somebody like yourself, doing what you love, number one, but then also doing it in the right way. And so I'm excited about this. I was pumped when you asked. I was like, finally.
Listen, I was like, at first I was just like, dang man, I wanted to ask her, but she be so busy, so I don't be knowing. But sometimes you gotta like, see what everybody's doing. So I definitely appreciate you, taking the time out to, just be on the podcast and just be able to, share your journeys and experience. So, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. So, Coach, tell me about like just your process, your journey since you left Weber. Like, let's talk.
I know. Wow. It's been it's about to be going into 10 seasons since I left Weber, right? Which I always say, never forget where you come from, right? To this day, I talked to Grady. I saw Lauren a couple weekends ago in Philly. And I think it's so amazing to remember all of you guys and everything that we've been through. I was actually talking to somebody just about, just where I started, so to speak. And I'm like, man, I gotta call those kids and apologize because I'm like, what was I telling them? I didn't know anything. So I'll go ahead and apologize for anything that I said, did, or any of that. Because it's been definitely 10 years of lots of growth, just investing in myself and people around me. But I've been extremely blessed to work for Coach Brooks. So after I left Weber, I joined Virginia Tech staff as a graduate assistant. I wanted to dip my toes at that Division One level, right? I think that's something that I just always was curious about and wanted to see what does it look like behind the scenes. So I was fortunate to join him as a GA, like I mentioned, and then kind of grew up from there, right? I was promoted to player personnel, then assistant coach, worked my butt off for that. And then when he took the job at Kentucky, he asked if I would come with him, and I said absolutely. So 2 years later, going to year three, here we are. We're ready to approach and about to start the year three at Kentucky. So that's kind of the summary of why I've been the last 10 years. But it's definitely been amazing journey and just definitely appreciate all the experiences that I was able to embrace.
No, no, I know, Coach. I want you to know that I appreciate you. I think about like when I came back from, from Weber and all the things that I've done, from there, all the hard work, the individuals that you put me through, and some of the things that you taught me, in the small conversations that we've had. I actually stood at my girls now. I actually talk a lot about you, when we talk about us getting into the gym. I tell them all the time about the 6 a.m.s you've had us doing, just scheduling that, checking in on us. Like that meant a lot to, us, more than you probably can know. I talk about all the time between you, Coach Lauren, and Coach Wallace. I don't know, you guys were just so like, impactful on the things that you instilled in us. And, I can't thank you enough because, Coach Grady can't do it all between Coach Carl and you guys. That was definitely something that if I never went through that, I don't think I would be who I am today. So, there's always a start and there's always a journey to, what we do. So, I definitely respect your grind. I've been following you, watching every game. It's like the ones I can catch when we're not having a game. So I definitely been, in tune to your journey and just respecting, your grind because you always did everything you could for us. And I definitely appreciate that. Maybe some of us didn't appreciate it then, but for sure. For sure appreciate it now, being on the coaching side of things and understanding, why you made us do a lot of different things. So that is super important, to it. So, Coach, what is your favorite moment of coaching? You've been at Weber, you're Virginia Tech, then University of Kentucky. What is the favorite moment out of all of that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I think there's definitely been several, right? And some of those moments could be just within a day span, right? Whatever happens in that day could be small wins that the player can achieve, and those are great moments. But I do think, like the most memorable so far moments in my career, reaching Final Four. That was something that was obviously a pinnacle of women's basketball just to see and experience, but to see young ladies who worked extremely hard, not just that year, but to build up, to that moment. Everything that they sacrificed, the players, the staff, everybody, and then finally see all of us to get on that ladder and cut the nets going to Final Four. I think that was extremely rewarding because you hear people say it, right? When you win a championship, you're gonna cry, you're gonna do all those things, and sometimes it's hard to imagine when people talk about it, but when you experience that, you see how rewarding it is. So to see young ladies, be happy and finally see their work, that was extremely rewarding as a coach. A couple of years ago, Georgia Amore, one of our point guards that played for us at Virginia Tech and then transferred with us at University of Kentucky, got drafted, and I got to be in the room at New York City and to hear her name, like, I mean, just your body goes into a different, situation where you're like, you have no idea what you're doing. You're clapping, yelling, and that was really rewarding. And like I said, even this moment today to get on the podcast with you, like you said, after all the times that I probably didn't think that it mattered, right? But now you talk about it, you remember, and you're saying that you are telling the same things to your young players. And I think all of those moments from winning games to seeing players achieve their goals, as well as just having relationships with players to this day, checking on them, talking to them, making sure that the partnership and relationship keeps going is so important. So I would say all of those things kind of combined of why we do this, right? And those are really like special moments that happened to me so far in life.
Dang, coach, to experience to be in that WNBA room and hearing a player that have grinded with, you have watched work hard and they get their name drafted. That is crazy. Like I wait on the day that I can sit in a room and say like I got to experience that with a player that I watched work hard and build and get to that point. So I know it probably was an amazing feeling. Like I know that was crazy. I think nowadays, I think we, take for granted, the relationships that we build with these kids. And I think the kids right now don't really understand, how important it is to build those connections and relationships because look at us right now, 10 years later, and we get to sit here and actually like talk about the things that we've been through, where we started at and the journey and how far that could actually take us, just having a conversation and saying, dang, like we came so far and mentally you think like, dang, I didn't make any impact on this kid, but I think that we take that for granted. And I think a lot of coaches should sit down and say, hey, listen, like, this is what I'm trying to do and think more about how you care about the athlete, instead of just talking about basketball in general. So, that's a good one. Like, I really wish, I could have been a fly on that wall, just, to see, the amazing excitement in that room. So, I kind of want to push into our questions a little bit.
Hmm.
A lot of times, I've dealt with so many different athletes, a lot of kids, want to go to different levels and, understanding the recruitment process is super, super important. So like, what is one of the biggest mistakes, like, that you've seen over the years that kids make, during the recruitment process?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I wouldn't say like necessarily mistakes, but I would say just lessons that I think if you look back, and I've seen families go through, recruits go through, even us, right? No, nobody's perfect, right? So I would say one of the big things is focusing on what matters in the moment, right? So a lot of players, families, everybody around is focusing on what the recruiting process is in that moment. And what I mean by that is focusing on, shiny things, right? Like, coaches, we always going to talk about how many pairs of shoes you're going to get when you come to a certain school, right? And all of those things that I call shiny, sexy things, right? We're in that moment in the recruiting process, that is what's in front of you, because those are conversations. But I think that families that can dig deep, right, and look what's behind all of that, what's important, your fit to the program, right? Ask the right questions. I think sometimes families, either sometimes just lack of knowledge, right, or maybe sometimes just getting caught in, again, what's in front of them, right, all of those things, and not asking the right questions, the tough questions, right? Like, I think it's important. You're going to hopefully go somewhere for 4 years to graduate and spend very important, you know, years in your life. And I think you deserve to ask those tough questions. And I think that's one of the, again, not mistakes, but like lessons that I think everybody can take from each other, right? Like, ask tough questions, ask what kind of system, the coach is coaching, right? How do you like to play offensively, defensively, all of those things, right? Ask about the culture, because it's very easy in recruiting to get caught up in the shiny things, because that's obviously part of recruitment, right? That's why it's called recruitment. But I
Hmm.
think it's very important to dig deeper, and figure out what's behind that. So I would say that, you know, and focusing on your own journey. I think a lot of times, especially now with social media and all of those things, people sharing these stories, you just have more access to information in some ways. But I think focusing on your own journey, what matters to you, what matters to people around you, I think that's huge. Don't look around your shoulder and see who's doing what. Just focus on yourself and what's important to you to make that decision. And I think at the end you'll see good results. So I would say those couple of things that has really stood out in the last couple of years, more than ever. So.
No, no. I think going from overseas and semi-pro and then transition to high school, that's one of the biggest things that I've seen, in these processes, that a lot of times kids focus on the shiny things. And I like to call the way I talk to my kids is we always talk about the opportunity to play.
Mhm.
A lot of times we want to go to the next level, but we don't understand what the opportunity of play looks like for them. The person next to you may not have the same minutes as you. The person next to you may be scoring 20 points in high school, and then, you're scoring six, but you might go to college and get more playing time than they would, because they don't fit the system that they're in. And I think a lot of times, kids don't really dig deep into that. And like you said, asking the right questions is important. Asking people that understand what they're doing, knowing where they're going, and have been to those places and seen those things. When we were doing overseas and semi-pro, I get so many kids from, there from colleges that said, "Oh, I sat the bench. I didn't get to play. I want to live out, my last year of college." And one thing I used to tell them was, you can't live out what you already was already past. All you can do is move forward, and talk about what your next is, because if you're trying to, get what you lost, then it's not going to give you what you really need, and sometimes we have to sit back and think about what is the game really giving us, and what are we trying to get back from it, and a lot of times, I tell kids, it's like, it's a give and take. If I give, you give something, and then they take something, and then sometimes they give something, and then you take. So a lot of times, I don't think a lot of coaches and parents are really sitting down talking to their kids about what that looks like for them, and that kind of goes into just, talking about points and stats. A lot of times, kids focus a lot on, their performance, which I do think that is very important to be productive in the game. um what is important to college coaches when, other than the points and stats when you're looking at, because again, a kid could be scoring 25, 15, 6 points, and their playing time goes into college and looks entirely different, because that kid that scored 6 points is more valuable because they understand system.
Yeah, for sure. Like you said, we can't just ignore the fact that points and then scoring and whatever it plays a role in recruiting. But I do think when we go past that, you look more into who you are, right? What type of teammate you are. Are you willing to sacrifice some things? When your teammate makes a bad pass to you and it hits your feet and it's not the right pass, so roll your eyes or you go and high five. The body language. Are you coachable? I think all of those things are extremely important and goes beyond basketball, right? Now, I do think, going to college, I think the big thing is potential, right? Sometimes, like to your point, sometimes you go to college and that's kind of like you plateau. You like this is it for you. I think for us, at least the way we recruit at University of Kentucky, it's you have to look at the potential as well, right? Like you may not be all the way fully finished product, right? And that's okay. Can we work with you? Can we develop? And that's huge. But besides the basketball part, I think just who you are as a person is huge. Being the right fit for the culture. Because as you know, you played. You only play so many games a year, right? You only have so many practices. Then you get to spend so much more time beyond basketball. So you're essentially inviting somebody to your family, right? Like that's what the team is, that's what the program is. And so it goes beyond just like who you are as a basketball player, because not everybody can, score an average 20 points a game and 15 rebounds or whatever, right? Somebody will have to average 4 points and then maybe zero rebounds and just be really good teammate, right? And you see that across all the levels. So everybody gets rewarded. You watch WNBA right now, and some vets are still on the bench, right? They may not be playing as many minutes, but they're there for a reason. What's your purpose? And I think that's huge, no matter what level you play, to find that role and be really good at that. And when we go watch games, right? It could be high school, it could be travel ball, whatever case it is. I think we get to the point as coaches, we're no longer watching how you're scoring the ball, right? Like that is at that point, like I may watch you for like 2 days straight at that point. And I'm watching what's around you, who's in your corner. I like to say like who you bringing to the party, right? Like who's coming with you, right? Who's clapping, who's not clapping, right? Who's acting up out there, right? All of those things matter. And I think because at the end of the day, there's going to be some tough days. It's not just like, oh yeah, I come to college and this is going to be the best 4 years of your life and everything is going to be smooth and nice. And there's going to be tough days, like that, just life. And I think the families and the kids and everybody around them that can figure that out quickly, I think that can play out a big role, because if you have a personality, if you have characteristics to go through hard days, and you have a great support system that will help you through those days, then you're going to be really successful. And I think that's huge. So I think beyond the points and then who you are as a basketball player, that's what, I like to tend to look at it, us as a staff. I mean, those are huge things for us. We no longer, when we have recruiting meetings, you're no longer talking about, hey, like, how did she score? How many threes did she make? Well, that's beyond. We already established that, she's a good player, but we talk about other things. So I would pay attention to those intangibles that sometimes may seem that they're not important, but they are.
Absolutely. Listen, I want to bring up a story. I remember it was my sophomore season, and I made a mistake. I got in the
Mm.
game, and I passed the ball in, and I stepped on the line before I passed it in, and Grady didn't put me in for 2 games after that. And I remember I went to you, and I was so frustrated because I've been putting in work. I made one simple mistake, and the first thing you said was he has to trust you. and from that time, it was like, dang, because I didn't pay attention to the small detail, and that could have been like a tough situational where we really needed that, but and then I made that mistake, just that one. In his mind, it's like, oh, I can't trust her because I need her to understand the details and how important it is, and then we got in the gym. I worked hard. I made sure I practiced it. It was hard. It was tough. And I think a lot of times, kids go into some high schools and they think about, oh well, I don't understand why she's taking me out, why he's taking me out. All I did was hit foul, or all I did was this. But the strategy behind some of that stuff and the trust that you got to have in that system, sometimes the point doesn't matter at that time, especially if it's a tie game and we're talking about we need to go into overtime, and instead of us trying to score, then better situations and giving team rest, and I think a lot of times we're not thinking about that stuff. People are just thinking about, I gotta score this much. A lot of times what I'm telling the girls is like, hey, you're coming in as a freshman, so they already got people that can score. Right now, they just need to see what you need to develop so that you can give that person a rest, or you're fighting for a spot every single day because they're always looking for somebody else to take your spot. So I really try to instill that in whoever I come across, no matter who that is, whether they leave or go, or whether it's just a moment that I get with them, because I really don't understand how a lot of kids kind of let social media kind of deter them away from what the game actually is right now. But again, it's the shiny things, like you say, is seeing those scores, seeing those things, and I tell kids too, don't be a celebrity in high school. Don't be a local celebrity. Do something that's going to get you noticed. Do something that's going to get the college coach to say, I need that kind of character on my team. I need that kind of leader on my team. So my, biggest thing right now is trying to instill character in the kids so that they understand how to build and be in that system, and then go and, be open enough to talk to the coach and say, hey, coach, what do you need from me, in this moment, in these times, in this year? Because I remember when I came in as a point guard. I couldn't shoot. My offensive confidence was low. I just was great at defense. And then, we got into the gym, and between you and Coach Carl was like, we're shooting every day. We're, dribbling drills. I remember the specific drill, and I hated it so much. You put
What
a
was
bag on all the balls and told me that I had to dribble full court. And I was so tired. I was like, bro, I could not. But I kept seeing myself when I go to practice, and that's not a bad with the ball. My handles got better, and so it was a lot of different things that I think a lot of kids don't really see behind the scenes. Because they forget about the shine. They look at the shiny things and forget about what it really takes for a coach to really want you on their system. And you don't, it's not that you're not good. It's just they gotta fit the system that you guys are looking for as college coaches, and especially when you are planning for the next 4 years of what that could look like, depending on what you're losing as a senior. So I guess my next question is going to
Wait,
the
wait,
actual.
before you go, I'm gonna have to bring those bags. I haven't used the bags in a while.
Oh my, I hated those bags, man. I hated those bags with
It's,
everything
it's
in me.
it's been a minute. I may have to bring the bags out. But
This is.
last thing I'll say about trust, I think when, and that's obviously a great story that you shared, but a lot of people mistake the playing time, right, or the playing opportunities with that trust. I always say, like, it doesn't happen in that moment, right? Like,
Mhm.
you can build trust, you can build that with your coach, with the coaching staff prior, right? What happens in practice? And I think sometimes that's what is mistaking when somebody makes one mistakes and they get pulled out of the game, and they're like, well, the coach doesn't trust. Well, probably a lot of things have happened also prior to that, right, that not everybody sees. So yeah, I mean, that's a big part, like trust, and that is not happening. Like, it's not just like you flip the switch, right, and you all of a sudden do great things in the game. Like, it starts in
Mhm.
practices, it starts in the workouts, it starts in everything that you do. So I agree with that.
Yeah, no, and just to add to that, we've been doing like weights and all that other stuff. Like we do, weight. I try to run our system like a college system. Weights before practice or after practice. Something that will get them already in the mindset of, hey, I want to be ready. And today we had practice this morning. And then afterwards, I was like, all right, ladies, like, after we get done, I'm gonna go to the weight room and work out. If you guys want to come, it's optional. No, you can come. So one of my kids, she's a little young. She's like a 10th grader, and she was like, Coach, she walked into there, she's like, Coach, can you take me home? And I was like, well, no, I can't take you home today. You gotta have to figure it out. And she kind of stormed out, and her dad was like, she really wants to come work out with you. And I was like, oh man, like, so I had sat down and talked to her, and I was like, listen, I've seen you grow from your freshman year to now, and you have gained my trust to know that you're going to work hard. But now that you gained my trust, my expectations are higher now. And she was like, all right, coach, I got you. And it's just like some of the things that, I'm yelling at her, like, hey, run down the floor, do this, do that. She's rim running now. She's posting up in the middle. She's grabbing the ball, doing spin moves, things I have never seen her do before, and it's all because I took that little time with her, over these last couple of weeks and just, really instilled in her like, hey, you have to understand your potential. And now my job is to see that potential and speak into it and say, hey, I know that you can do this. So now that builds that trust between us too, to know, and not just her, but the other girls that really understand, that don't understand the game, but don't, they want to actually be on the floor. So that's one of the things that I'm really, really trying to, instill in the girls is trust. And not just for basketball, but these connections go so far. And I tell them all the time, I was like, I don't think y'all understand. Like, basketball has gotten me where I'm at. Just because I know, and I know someone and they know my work ethic, they know the things I've done, they say, hey, they recommend you, they'll bring you along, but you have to keep that motivation and you have to build that stuff, over time. And that just kind of pushes us into the academic side of it. How important is academics and how much of a role does that play, in your recruitment process, especially when you're watching a kid that it could be a possible prospect, especially in high school.
Yeah, I mean, academics are huge, right? At the end of the day, I think that's a beautiful thing about going to college. You become a student athlete. You have to understand that there's an order. It's a student athlete, and and everybody takes it seriously. I think it's huge because I truly believe, and at least for us with University of Kentucky, we believe how you do anything is how you do everything, right? Like if you cannot turn in assignments on time, if you're late to class, that means it's gonna, more than likely push to the next assignment, right? It's gonna translate to the court. I think that's huge. Academics are big because that shows really how disciplined you are, how motivated you are, because it is hard, right, to balance both. And I think that's big. At the end of the day too, like basketball career, no matter, you may play for 10 years, 15 years, right, but the career will stop, right, the ball will stop bouncing, so to speak. So I think what you gather through your academic career is going to be important, developing certain skill set, and having a diploma, right? I think it's such a huge thing, especially if you're an athlete and you're fortunate to receive full scholarship, partial scholarship, whatever that is, because that degree, it's something that nobody will take away from you. That's something that you will carry for the rest of your life. You can frame that, you can put it on your wall, and that's something that will take you to many places. So I think it's huge. We take it seriously. But I do think at the end of the day, it reflects a lot of how serious you are about what you do in life, right? Anything, how you do anything is how you do everything. And for us, it's really big. And we've been very strong in academic part. I got to make sure that they go to study hall like you guys were knuckleheads.
God, we listen, y'all. I'm gonna tell y'all, we tried to skip study hall, and Rat came and found us, and the amount of running we did was insane. I don't think nobody understands how important that study hall is. And I think it was my sophomore year. I almost flunked out of a class, and Grady pulled me into the office and was like, "Yo, man, like, if you flunk out, you're gonna have to take this class, and you got to do." I was like, "Yo, like, I've never had to have this conversation before," but it's you don't really understand how important it is because I was so in tune with like, oh my gosh, I got so much free time. We're partying. It was just so much, that we had to do. It was one more story that I got to share you. We went to Wendy's. You told us curfew was at 11 o'clock. It was like 10:30. We were like, yo, we can make it if we just go right now. And you text us like, hey, I'm on the way to your room. And I was like, shit. I was like, oh man, we're gonna get caught. We were doing like 100 miles, and just like we had just like turned the car off, got in the house, sat down, and you opened the door. You and Lauren. I was like, yo, we made it by like the skin of our teeth, because I was so nervous. I did not want to have a 5 a.m. run because I was like, yo. But that's kind of just one of the things that kids, they're still when they're going in, we're still kids, and a lot of times we don't think about those things. We think, oh, we're an adult, we could go in, we'll be able to do it until you get up and you're up partying until 3 in the morning, but you got 6 o'clock practice and you're not thinking about how that's going to take on your body and your performance and the things you need to do, and especially like we had Wednesdays where it's always study hall at 1 p.m. We're in there for about 3 hours and you take that for granted, but it taught us time management. It taught us punctuality. It taught us, how to be responsible, especially for our own self. There's now where my girls will be like, coach, this teacher, he won't let me turn my assignment in. So I was like, okay, well, show me when the assignment is due. And then they start stuttering. And I was like, okay, we give like an hour for lunch, because we're a charter school. So they'll give like, I said, so what is flex for? I start asking questions. Well, flex is for, me to go back and make up some work. I said, well, did you take that time seriously? Well, I had to go get my girlfriend, coach. I had to go get my boyfriend. They wanted to walk around. Well, if you don't care, then why should I care? And those are the
Yep.
things that I'll say to them because I'm like, you guys have to understand and take that responsibility and use that time wisely. Because if we're sitting in here and I'm going to a teacher saying, hey, can you give him extra time? Then you're making me look crazy because then you don't tell me the whole story. So we're now sitting in here with this teacher like, hey, what's going on? What we're doing? So those are a lot of things where kids don't really understand that the small details that you do outside of basketball actually translate to the court, because if you're late to class and you turn an assignment in late, that means you might be late on that screen. You might come late to a practice. You got an excuse on why you didn't go help your teammate up. Those are bad habits that you're creating, especially when you're talking about playing at different levels of basketball.
Absolutely. And I think like we even notice, us as a coaching staff, we're pretty involved in academic part. I still am, that study hall and some other things, not as much as I used to, just let us say that. But I do say that sometimes we have what we call like a weekly meeting with our academic advisor, right? So he will go over some players, right, and how they doing in class or whatnot. And especially during the season when we get heavier in basketball practices and whatnot, I notice a lot that it's a direct correlation. Like if we get to the academic meeting and we hear that such and such missed an assignment, right, or whatever, more than likely there's a direct correlation of them not really doing great in practice the last week. There's a little bit of that as well. So I think it's extremely important as well to be aware, of things. Or you could be simple as somebody's having a really big test coming up, right? And it's not that they're being lazy by any means, or are they not doing any like wrong things. It's just simply they've been studying a lot, right? Now you fatigue, you all of those things. So now you got to pay a close attention to what's happening in practice to them. If they, some pre-med student who's been studying up all night for a bio exam, or whatever other difficult subject it is out there, and they're struggling in practice, that's more than like the direct correlation. So I think it is even for the coaches really good to be aware of what's going on and be involved in the academic life and not just to manage and make sure you guys doing your homework and going to study hall, but also understand what's going on in their lives. I think that's big. So we're not just being, policing around the small, so like understanding the overall picture as well.
No, for sure. I mean, but those things again, like those things push us to be better people, not just better basketball players, and for the coaches to pay attention to that, it's really big, because you're not thinking like that as a student, especially a student athlete of the game, somebody that just took a pre-med test, yesterday or an hour before practice, and then now their body is, now saying, okay, I can relax, and you go to practice and you look sluggish. You kind of just like, dang, you don't, it's not that they're lazy, they're tired, and
Yep.
that is super important, because we talk to the girls about, just making sure you get enough rest and, knowing how to monitor study hall time and those different things. So, that I think that's really big. Now, you talked a little bit about you guys going to different games and high schools and AAU. What are some of the trends that you are now seeing in recruiting that has changed over the last 10 years, for the high school, even sometimes transfer portals, that stuff can get a little difficult. So what are some of the trends that you're seeing now?
Yeah, I think obviously social media has taken off. I think that's been huge, for recruiting, and it goes for both parties, right? For the recruits and us, interactions. You get to promote yourself, you have to present yourself, and I think that's been huge. So I do think different platforms on social media has been a huge trend when it comes to recruiting. When you look back, the level of access that we have right now to each kid, each family, each everything, it's unbelievable. So I think that's been huge. It's been helpful and hurtful at the same time. I think depends on how you're using some of this. But for us, I think it's been really good to find information. I do a lot of international recruiting still, and I think that's been a big thing because back in the day, so to speak, 10 years ago, it was hard to sometimes you may watch film, but you didn't know how to reach out to the kid if you didn't have certain connections. Nowadays, every player globally, more than likely, has Instagram, right? Has TikTok. Um, and I think you can easily reach out to them. So I think those are trends, but also that's something that has escalated the recruiting. And I think that's been huge. Players being able to even do homework on us too. They get to see who we are, and that's been big. The last couple of years, if we're shrinking that timeline a little bit, obviously, name, likeness, and image has taken over, right, as a big component of recruitment of student athlete life right now. I think what we've noticed as of the last couple of years, agents' involvements, right? A lot of players nowadays, it's no longer just
Oh,
calling
wow.
it's no longer, hey, like I got to call your AAU coach. It's like, hey, you need to call my agent. Um,
Oh, man.
and that's been huge. That's been part of what we're seeing with a revenue share. The Like I said, the name, likeness, and image situation. Players have representations that go beyond basketball, right? They deserve that. There's a right way to do this. There's definitely great opportunities for them, and but that's definitely been something extremely new as of recent, and us as a coaches, that's something that we learning about. We have to embrace, or you're going to be left behind. And it's been also unique to learn the different side of recruiting now, right? Like you talk to you coach more about the basketball, and then you have to talk to the agent about other circumstances. And but that's been something that's definitely been new, and I would say those two things kind of go hand to hand: social media, agents, and where we are with promoting athletes. But I would say those are the two that sticks out the most right now.
Okay. You just said they have agents now
Mm-hmm.
to be recruited?
Recruited, represent their, yeah, they represent the contracts, money, because that's obviously something that in the last couple of years it's been huge. We college athletes starting to be paid, So that's, obviously their representation who's reviewing their contracts and things like that, which I think they've been a very important part, but also there's another layer that you have to make sure, it's right. And what I mean by that is, whoever you're aligning yourself, you got to make sure that it's a right fit. So now in the recruitment process, you're not longer just, picking the high school and AAU. Now you're picking your agent. And that's got to be a right fit, right? When we were talking about who's in your corner, who's helping you. And it's been big. There are great agents out there that are doing things for the right reasons, which has been phenomenal to get to know them and learn their side of work, because it's very different than what we do. But it's definitely something that's new, and I think it's just a matter of time when it spreads around all the levels.
Wow. I mean, I've seen some different things, but that this is the first of hearing the ages. But I can understand because the level you guys are at. It's very common because you guys are doing the NIL stuff, and a lot of times these kids don't understand how to manage their money, and they don't know what they're signing up for or what they're getting into. So that's crazy. That's
Yeah.
crazy. So what is one of the myths that you have heard that you would wish that parents and athletes would stop believing in recruiting?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. I would say there are a few. I'd say the first one is, obviously, one of the big things is like kids get offers, right? Like, that's a very normal thing. We recruit the kid, we recruit the family, and at some point, head coach makes an offer, right? It's a very common thing, and you see it across everywhere. I think one of the things that it's always maybe kind of myth, right? That offer is there, but it's not always going to be there, right? And then sometimes it has nothing to do with the player itself. It has nothing to do with the family or any of that. It's just simply a roster construction, right? Because I mean, those kids being recruited by many schools, we're recruiting other kids as well. That's just part of how it goes.
Right.
So if, let's just, for example, say we're recruiting a point guard, and for that particular class, we can only take one point guard, right? And we have, maybe offered three players because we don't know where such and such is going to go. And I think sometimes families feel like, they're in control and they are decision makers at all times. And I think sometimes that is not the case. Sometimes the decision might be made for you. Now, I'm not saying that it's something that you have to rush your decision because of that. That's definitely not what I mean by that. I'm just simply saying that, sometimes you feel like you are being recruited and you controlling everything, but there's also factors that goes behind the scene on our end that influence their decision at the end of the day. So I think that's something that it's huge to be explained, to understood, and it's our job too. I feel like we do a pretty good job of explaining that on the front end, especially when we get deeper in recruiting, right? And it kind of gets down to finish line. Kids take 8 official visits. Well, we gotta take some, bring some recruits on our end too, because if you take an 8 official visits, that means the chances that you're coming here is 1 out of 8, right? So it kind of goes hand in hand, like it goes on both parties. But I think that's a big one. The other one that I would say, just because I hear it a lot, you hear among families, you hear among coaches, is like, well, if such and such didn't come to your game this weekend, that means they're not interested in you. Well, we were watching you 2 weekends ago, or it could be like we watch you Friday, Saturday, and we didn't come to the game on Sunday. And some people will say, well, that means Kentucky's not interested. Well, that's not the case. Sometimes it's logistical issues. Sometimes it's just simply these tournaments are big. You go to Louisville, Run for Roses, there's 96 courts, right? And you have to spread and you have to do your job. And I think that's something that is important. Don't get me wrong. Like, you want the coach that's recruiting you to come and watch you. But also, I think sometimes it's okay. Like if they don't come to one of your games, or they're not there for one of the days, that doesn't mean that they're not interested in you anymore, or that the interest is less. It just sometimes is how the logistics works. So I think that those are the two that are kind of big to me, from what I've seen so far, that I can, I've seen it and I can relate to. So.
No, no, those are super important. I think a lot of times the kids don't really understand that. Like I get on to my girls all the time. Once you are offered, you need to be following up with the coach. Hey coach, I'm playing in this tournament this weekend. Hey coach, this is what I did this week. What are you looking for? Can I come to a game? Stuff like that. Just to let them know that you are interested in them. I said because as fast as they see you, sometimes you could be pushed to the end of the list just because they're looking for a different type of thing. And I think one of the biggest things that I push my kids to ask, especially when they go on offers, visits, I say, hey, ask them what you need to do to be better for their system. Because you can sit here and be like, hey, I'm going to get better, coach. I'm going to get in the gym. I'm going to shoot. I'm going to do this. But if they, again, already got three shooters sitting on the bench, then, now you're playing behind those three. I'll give an example. I remember I had became a shooter, and Grady pushed me from point guard more, and he was like, "Oh well, since you're doing this, then he bring in Tori, then you got Jessica Colson, that are super consistent, hitting shots. I remember one game we played Warner, and Tori came back and hit like 7 threes, and brought us back into the game. But you're talking about somebody that wants to really get in the game, but if she's hot, then I'm not getting the minutes. So you have to think about those different things, and a lot of players don't understand like the aspects of hey, this is what I need, this is what I need to ask, because I really do feel like those are big things. But we're gonna get into our Q&A right now. We had a couple. I think we have one or two questions. One of the questions was kind of interesting. They said, Rad, have you ever misevaluated a recruit?
Well, I should say probably no, but I'm a human, so I would say yes. Yeah, I mean it happens. Sometimes you look back and, um, yeah, it happens. I'll be honest, it doesn't happen often, but it does. And sometimes it's not even anything to do with, the particular moment. It might be just a system, right, that we like to play versus to where the player goes, and whatnot. So. I'd say yes, it happens. A matter of, that's part of the game too, right? Like as a recruiter, you recruit the player, you evaluate them, you bet on some of them, and then on some of them, you see what happens. So it's part of the game. So.
No, I mean, it is what it is. You're not gonna always get, what you thought you're gonna get, and you do what the cards that's dealt to you. Um, I guess my last question is, what would you tell a senior or junior, that wants to get recruited, or even like just any athlete that's wanting to go into the game as a women's basketball player, because our that game has changed a lot, in general. What do you do, and what do you tell them going forward, what they need to be doing, what they should do?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing start with, like we talked about, academics, right? You got to make sure that your grades are right, that you'll be able to, get into college, right? That you'll be able to make sure that you exceed, you're successful in that regard. When it comes to basketball, I think that's where you're starting to ask tough questions, right? When you're starting to dig deep, so to speak, and I think that's the time, right? You want to make a decision. You don't want to make it too soon, but you also don't want to be like I was mentioning earlier, right? You don't want to be in a situation where, decision is made for you. So I think this is a perfect time, your junior, senior year, whatever your journey is in that moment, like we talked about earlier, right? Like you got to focus on your journey, but then take the right, actions and the right steps, towards your own journey, right? So if you're being recruited, and you have a list of schools, maybe it's time to narrow down, maybe it's time to narrow down to a few that you can really get to know, that you can really figure out who the people are, what type of system they play, and things like that, right? Maybe if you're a player who's not getting as recruited, right? And you aspire to get some more offers. Maybe it's a time to send your film out, right? Maybe it's time to connect with some people. But I think it's definitely a time where things get a little bit more serious in recruiting, for both ends. You know, for us too. That's when we starting to lock in a little bit more into, you know, when are they making decision, right? That's one of the big questions that we like to ask. What's your timeline? So start thinking about all of those things. But I think it starts with just, you know, making sure that your academics are clean, you know, that you got all that button up. And then after that, whatever your journey is, right? Not looking across anybody's else's. What do you need to do, right? Well, and you gotta ask those questions to yourself. Be honest with yourself, and then when you can answer those, you'll be able to make a right decision.
Listen, Coach, I definitely appreciate this. I don't know, how these kids are, not understanding, how much resources it is out here just to ask questions. Even if you're not getting recruited, guys, I really encourage you to ask questions, even when a coach says no. I think a lot of times kids get so discouraged when they say, hey, no, you don't fit my system. I do a lot of back end work of making sure that the kid, I'm sending out the film from the kids. I make them create their own film, send it to me. I'm reaching out to coaches, and once they say yes, coach, I want to talk to this kid. We're sitting down preparing our questions and what we need to go over for that. Too, understanding what you need to put in highlights. And I think the biggest thing that, I've been enforcing too is getting the parents involved in that conversation as well. Because, the parents need to ask their questions as well. And then sometimes they don't know what questions to ask. So sometimes I'll sit down with the parents and the child and say, hey, this is what we need to do and this is what we need to ask. And again, I go back to the opportunity to play. You can have great aspirations to go to the biggest schools ever, but your job, what you want from the game, you have to understand what role that plays in and what you're looking for in that as well. So I really do appreciate it. Listen, don't be a stranger, okay? I don't want it to be 10 plus years since we really chatted and talked. I know we've been talking here and there throughout the last couple of years, checking in on each other, but I don't want it to be another 10 years, coach. I gotta
I
come out
got
to
the
a
same number. You texted me like I don't have your number. I got the
I
same
got
number.
I gotta come to Kentucky. That's probably what it is. I
All
gotta
right,
come out
come
to
on
a
down.
game. I
Come
gotta
on
come out
down.
to a game. I'm definitely gonna try to get out to a game this year, especially try to bring a couple of girls so they can see, who impacted me when I was going through a lot of different things. But I can't tell you no lie. Like I really do appreciate you. Those years of college where you talk to me, you instill those things into me, and just pushing me. You may think that you said some harsh things, but I'm gonna be honest with you. It made me part of the coach I am today, and the person I am today, and how my drive is, and just in making myself better and the people that look up to me. So I definitely appreciate that, and I appreciate your time, coach.
No, I appreciate everything that you do for young ladies and then the game of the basketball. So keep up a good work. You're always welcome at Kentucky. It's a great place. It's a cool town. And just let me know if you ever need anything. We're gonna have to think of some ideas. We're gonna have to do this like an annual podcast or something.
Oh no, for sure, for
So it's not
sure.
every 10 years.
No. No, for sure, coach. That's for sure. All right, well, I'm gonna
All
hit
right.
you up, coach. I appreciate you. Listen, y'all, make sure y'all go follow Coach Rad and follow University of Kentucky women's basketball. Make sure you guys are looking at their games, and you have any questions, don't hesitate to hit my inbox. Because I can always try to give you as much information as I can. I love you guys, and we're out.